What if I told you? There was a battle so brutal, so calculated, so horrifying, that the men who survived it never spoke about it again. Not to their wives. Not to their children. Not to anyone. February 21, 1916, a small French town. Barely on the map. A place called Verdun. Before the sun rose that morning, 1,220 German artillery guns opened fire, all at once. For 8 straight hours, shells rained down on French positions. The ground shook like an earthquake. Trees were ripped from their roots. Entire trenches were buried alive. One French soldier, Louis Barthès, whose wartime diary was later published, wrote, "The noise was beyond anything a human mind could process. It wasn't sound anymore. It was the end of the world." But here's what most people don't know about Verdun: Germany didn't attack Verdun to win land, they attacked it to bleed France to death. Paul Jankowski, in his landmark book, Verdun, The Longest Battle of the Great War, describes the German strategy as one of the most cold-blooded plans in all of military history, not a battle to conquer, but a battle to destroy a nation's will to exist. The man behind this plan was German Chief of Staff Erich von Falkenhayn. And in January 1916, he wrote a secret memo to the Kaiser, a memo that would sentence nearly 700,000 men to death. He called it, "Bleeding France White." This is the story of Verdun. The longest, bloodiest, most devastating single battle of World War I, and it all started with one man's idea, that you don't need to defeat your enemy. You just need to make them destroy themselves. Stay with me. Because this story is only just beginning. In January 1916, General Erich von Falkenhayn sat down and wrote what historians now call the Christmas Memorandum, a secret letter to Kaiser Wilhelm II that outlined one of the most psychologically twisted war strategies ever conceived. His argument was simple, and utterly ruthless: France has one place it will never surrender. A place so sacred to French national identity that they will throw every last soldier into defending it. We attack that place. Not to take it, but to force France to bleed itself dry defending it. That place was Verdun, an ancient fortress city on the Meuse River, surrounded by hills and forts that France had held for centuries. Alastair Horn, in The Price of Glory, Verdun 1916, writes that Falkenhayn chose Verdun precisely because it was a symbol, not a strategic military target. He knew the French would never let it fall. And that pride, that patriotism, would become their trap. The plan had a name, Ausbluten, German for bleeding white, and on February 21, the trap was sprung. German infantry advanced behind the artillery storm. French defenders, shell-shocked, half-buried, many of them deaf from the explosions, stumbled out of their trenches to fight. Fort Douaumont, the strongest fort in France, fell in just 2 days. Captured almost by accident by a small German patrol that found it barely defended. When news reached Paris, the shock was total. France had 2 choices: abandon Verdun and suffer a devastating blow to national morale, or pour men into a furnace with no end in sight. They chose to fight, and that is exactly what Falkenhayn had counted on. The trap had worked. Now came the slaughter. When Fort Douaumont fell, France's entire military establishment went into crisis. General Philippe Pétain, a man known for his cool, calculated thinking, was rushed to Verdun on the night of February 25. He arrived at 11 p.m. in freezing cold, took one look at the situation, and reportedly said, "Courage. We'll get them." But the reality he faced was almost impossible. Paul Jankowski writes in Verdun, The Longest Battle of the Great War, that Pétain's genius wasn't in grand tactics, it was in logistics. He understood that Verdun could only survive if it was constantly resupplied. There was only one road connecting Verdun to the rest of France, a narrow, winding road, just wide enough for 2 trucks to pass each other. Pétain turned it into the most famous supply line in history. Trucks ran 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 1 truck every 14 seconds. Soldiers were forbidden from stopping, even for accidents. If a truck broke down, it was simply pushed off the road. They called it La Voie Sacrée, the sacred way. Over the coming months, 50 million artillery shells, 23 million men, and enough food and ammunition to sustain a city under siege. All of it flowed down that single road. Meanwhile, the fighting at Verdun was unlike anything soldiers had ever experienced. Both sides were trapped in a hellscape of craters, mud, poison gas, and constant artillery. Men went mad. Entire units disappeared. Some soldiers described losing all sense of time, not knowing if they had been in the trenches for days or weeks, but France held. 3 words became the battle cry of every French soldier at Verdun: ils ne passeront pas, they shall not pass, and for the next 300 days, they didn't. There's a photograph taken above the Verdun battlefield in 1916, no trees. No roads. No fields. No signs of life, just craters. Thousands of overlapping craters, stretching as far as the camera could see. The landscape looked like the surface of the moon. Alistair Horn in The Price of Glory, Verdun 1916, describes the battlefield as a place where the normal rules of war had completely broken down. Men weren't fighting for territory anymore. They were fighting simply to stay alive, and often failing. The rotation system Pétain designed meant that nearly every French soldier eventually passed through Verdun. 70% of the entire French army fought here at some point during 1916. It was deliberate. Pétain believed no unit should be left at Verdun too long, because the psychological damage was total and permanent. Soldiers called it le moulin à viande, the mincing machine. Some of the most haunting accounts come from men who survived. One French lieutenant wrote home, "We are not men anymore. We are animals. We crawl. We eat when we can. We sleep in the mud next to the dead." The dead who used to be our friends. Germany, meanwhile, was suffering just as badly. Falkenhayn's plan had backfired horrifically. Germany was losing as many men as France, sometimes more. The very machine he designed to bleed France dry was bleeding Germany at the same rate. By summer 1916, both armies were locked in a death spiral neither could escape, and then, on July 1, 1916, something happened on a different part of the Western Front that would change everything. The British launched the Battle of the Somme, forcing Germany to divert troops away from Verdun. France could finally breathe, but the nightmare at Verdun was not over yet. On December 18, 1916, 302 days after it began, the Battle of Verdun officially ended. The front lines had barely moved. Germany held almost the same ground it held in February. France had recaptured Fort Douaumont. After 302 days, 40 million artillery shells, and close to 700,000 casualties, the map looked almost identical to where it started, but nothing else was the same. Paul Jankowski closes Verdun, the longest battle of the Great War, with a haunting observation: Verdun did not end wars. It did not decide the outcome of World War I. But it did something perhaps more lasting: it entered the soul of France. It became the wound that never fully healed. The ossuary of Douaumont, a massive memorial built after the war, contains the bones of over 130,000 unidentified soldiers. French and German alike. You can look through small windows into the basement, and see the bones piled together, enemies in life, indistinguishable in death. The land around Verdun is still too toxic to farm. It is called the Zone Rouge, the Red Zone. Even today, 100 years later, farmers occasionally find unexploded shells. The French government estimates it will take 300 more years for the land to fully recover, and every year, French and German leaders visit Verdun together, not as enemies, but as partners in remembrance, because Verdun teaches us something that no classroom ever could: war is not glorious. It is not fast. It is not clean. It is 302 days of two nations feeding their young men into a machine, and getting nothing back but grief. The soldiers at Verdun were not statistics, they were sons, brothers, fathers, men who had names, and dreams, and people who loved them, and they deserved better than what history gave them. Remember Verdun. Remember them. If this story moved you, share it. Like it. Because history forgotten is history repeated, and we cannot afford to forget Verdun.